The story of Joshua begins not with conquest, but with a threshold. After 40 years in the wilderness and the passing of their great leader Moses, the Israelites now stood on the edge of the Promised Land, ready to cross, but not yet victorious. Before them lay the Jordan River, flooded, uncrossable, not just a physical barrier, but a spiritual test. Would they, a generation born in sand and silence, now trust the God who had led their fathers out of Egypt? God's voice came to Joshua not with strategy, but with strength. Be strong and very courageous. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. This was not a private assurance. It was a call to lead an entire nation into a destiny greater than fear. 3 days, that's what they were given. God told Joshua, prepare the people. In 3 days you will cross the Jordan. Joshua sent 2 spies across the river to scout the first great city, Jericho. But their mission wasn't one of espionage. It was to encounter faith in an unlikely place. They found it in the home of Rahab, a prostitute, but also a believer. She had heard what God did at the Red Sea, and in her words, our hearts melted, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. She hid the spies at great risk to herself. In return, they promised to spare her family when the time came. A red cord in her window would mark her house for mercy. The spies returned with confidence. The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. Joshua rose early. The people packed up camp. The priests carried the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred symbol of God's presence, toward the river. As their feet touched the water's edge, something impossible happened. The Jordan, swollen from spring rains, stopped flowing. The water piled up far upstream at a town called Adam. Downstream, it vanished. And the people crossed, all of them, 12 tribes, parents and children, warriors and elders. On dry ground, God commanded that one man from each tribe pick up a stone from the middle of the riverbed where the priests had stood. Those 12 stones were stacked at Gilgal, their first camp in the new land, a monument of memory. When your children ask, what do these stones mean? You shall tell them, the Lord dried up the Jordan so that all the peoples of the earth might know the hand of the Lord is mighty. This was more than a military campaign. It was a spiritual inheritance. But before battle could begin, there was unfinished business. The men born in the wilderness had not been circumcised. At Gilgal, Joshua obeyed the covenant command. It was a moment of pain and pause, an act of national consecration. There they healed. There they waited. And there they celebrated the Passover for the first time in the land itself. That day, the manna stopped. The bread from heaven, which had sustained them for 40 years, ceased. Now they would eat from the land God had promised. Then came a final encounter before war. Near Jericho, Joshua saw a man standing with a drawn sword. He approached and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" The man replied, "Neither. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Joshua fell face down to the ground. "Take off your sandals," the man said, "for the place where you are standing is holy." This was not just territory, it was holy ground, and the conquest that lay ahead would not be won by strength alone. It would be won by obedience, by presence, and by the one who had always led them, from Egypt, through the wilderness, and now into promise. Jericho loomed ahead, its gates tightly shut, its walls seemingly impenetrable. To human eyes, it was a fortress built to defy time and siege. But God had no need for battering rams or ladders. What he asked for was obedience. The instructions were strange. March around the city once a day for 6 days, not with weapons drawn, but in silence. Priests leading the way, trumpets of ram's horns sounding before the Ark of the Covenant, the people following in quiet procession. Day after day, the Israelites walked, no shouting, no taunts, just the steady rhythm of feet on dust and the sound of trumpets echoing against stone walls. Inside the city, fear grew. Outside, a spiritual pressure mounted. On the 7th day, the pattern changed. They marched not once, but 7 times around the city. And on the 7th circuit, Joshua gave the command, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." The walls collapsed, not chipped or burned or scaled. They fell, flat, and the Israelites surged forward. Every man, woman, and child in Jericho, except for Rahab and her family, was put to death, just as God had commanded. It was a harsh judgment, but not without warning. Jericho had heard. Rahab had believed. The city chose defiance. The city was burned. The gold and silver, the bronze and iron were set apart for the Lord's treasury. And Joshua pronounced a curse. Cursed before the Lord is the man who undertakes to rebuild this city at the cost of his firstborn. Jericho was not just a victory, it was a statement. The battle belonged to the Lord. But with victory came the first failure. Unbeknownst to Joshua, one man among the people, Achan, had taken forbidden plunder from Jericho. He hid it beneath his tent. No one else knew, but God did. The Israelites moved to attack Ai, a smaller city. Confident from their triumph, they sent only a few thousand men, but Ai struck them down. 36 Israelites were killed. The army retreated in shock. Joshua fell on his face before the ark, crying out, "Why did you bring us across the Jordan only to be defeated?" But the Lord said, "Get up, Israel has sinned." God led them to the tribe, the clan, the family, and finally to Achan. He confessed. The stolen goods were found, and he, along with his entire household, was taken to the valley of Achor. There they were stoned and burned, a terrible price. But the sin was purged, and the people were clean again. Then God said, "Do not be afraid. Take the whole army and go up against Ai. This time I will give it into your hands." Joshua devised a strategy. He set an ambush behind the city while the main force approached from the front. Ai's army rushed out, confident again. As they chased the Israelites, the hidden ambush rose, entered the undefended city, and set it ablaze. When the men of Ai looked back and saw smoke rising, it was too late. Ai was captured. Its king was hanged. Its people destroyed. But this time, God allowed the Israelites to take livestock and spoil. After the battle, Joshua led the people to Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. There, he built an altar. He read aloud the entire law of Moses, every blessing and every curse. The people stood facing the two mountains, reaffirming the covenant in the very heart of the land. Not every battle would be won by miracle. Not every defeat would come from outside. But every step forward would depend on whether the people chose to trust, obey, and remember. Word spread quickly. The fall of Jericho and the destruction of Ai sent shockwaves through the land. Kings and cities who had once laughed at the Israelites now feared them. Some chose to fight, others chose to deceive. Far to the west, the people of Gibeon, skilled, resourceful, and afraid, watched the advance of Joshua's armies. They were Hivites, one of the peoples marked for destruction. But they had no intention of fighting. Instead, they crafted a plan. They dressed in worn sandals and tattered clothes. Their wineskins were cracked, their bread dry and moldy. And they came to Joshua with a lie. "We have come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us." Joshua and the elders were cautious. "What if you live near us?" they asked. "How can we make a treaty with you?" But the Gibeonites insisted, "We are your servants. We have heard of the Lord your God, what he did in Egypt, what he did to the kings east of the Jordan. That's why we've come from far away." They held out their moldy bread, their broken wineskins. They told the story well, and Joshua made a treaty with them. He swore by the name of the Lord to let them live. But 3 days later, the truth was uncovered. Gibeon was not far. It was just a few miles away. A neighbor, a city that should have been conquered. The Israelites were angry, but they could not break the oath, for they had sworn it before the Lord. Instead, Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said, "You deceived us. Because of that, you are now cursed. You will never be free. You will be woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God." And they accepted it. They said, "We feared the Lord your God. We knew this land was given to you. Better to be your servants than to be destroyed." So the Gibeonites lived, not as warriors, but as workers, bound in servitude, yet spared by mercy. And in time, they became loyal servants, even joining the rebuilding of Jerusalem centuries later. But their survival would not go unnoticed. News of the Gibeonite treaty enraged the kings of Canaan, especially one, Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem. He gathered 4 other kings of Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, and formed an alliance. Not to attack Israel, but to punish Gibeon for surrendering. The 5 kings marched against the city. Gibeon sent messengers to Joshua. "Do not abandon your servants. Come quickly. Save us." And Joshua marched. He led his army up from Gilgal through the night. And the Lord said to him, "Do not be afraid. I have given them into your hands. Not one of them will stand against you." Joshua struck suddenly. The armies of the 5 kings broke and fled. But God fought alongside Israel. As the enemy fled down the road from Beth Horon, the Lord hurled great stones from the sky. More died from the hail than from the swords of Israel. But the day was running out, and Joshua needed more time. He turned to the Lord, and before all of Israel he cried out, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, moon over the valley of Aijalon." And the sun stood still. The moon stopped. Time itself bowed to the voice of faith. The battle continued until Israel was victorious. And never before or since has there been a day like it, when the Lord listened to the voice of a man. Joshua pursued the 5 kings. They had hidden in a cave. He ordered the entrance sealed with stones, and later they were brought out, laid before the army, and executed. Their bodies were thrown back into the cave, sealed as a monument to their defiance. And Joshua pressed on, city after city, Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron-Debir, each fell. The southern campaign was swift and unstoppable, not because Israel was strong, but because the Lord fought for them. The land trembled, the hearts of kings failed. The promise was becoming reality, one battle at a time. Word of Joshua's victories spread beyond the southern hills, reaching the great kingdoms of the north. There, a new alliance was forming, one even more formidable than before. Jabin, king of Hazor, the most powerful city-state in the north, summoned kings from the mountains, the plains, the valleys, and the coastlands. They came with horses and chariots, more than Israel had ever seen. It was not just a coalition. It was an army vast as the sand on the seashore. They met at the waters of Merom, a place open and wide where they could move their chariots freely. Their numbers threatened to overwhelm. But God's word to Joshua was clear. Do not be afraid of them. Tomorrow at this time I will hand all of them over to you slain. And then he added a strange command: hamstring their horses, burn their chariots. These were the most advanced tools of war. But God didn't want his people to rely on them. He wanted them to rely on him. Joshua struck suddenly. The battle at Merom was fierce, but the Lord delivered them all. The mighty alliance shattered. Israel pursued them north, east, and west, leaving no survivor. And as commanded, Joshua hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots. Hazor, the head of all those kingdoms, was captured and burned. Its king was put to the sword. No other city in the north received such treatment, for Hazor had been the center of power, and its fall signaled the collapse of resistance. Then came a different kind of war, one without trumpet blasts or falling walls. A slower war of patience, persistence, and territory. Joshua waged battle for years. He defeated 31 kings in total. City after city, stronghold after stronghold, from the hill country to the Negev, from the western foothills to the slopes of Mount Hermon. The conquest stretched across seasons. It was not completed in a day or even a year, but by faithful obedience through time. But even as land was taken, enemies remained. Not every fortress fell, not every tribe finished what they began. The conquest was complete in principle, but incomplete in practice. The land lay subdued, but not yet fully possessed. And so the time came to divide it. God spoke to Joshua, "You are old, and very much of the land still remains, but I will drive them out. Assign it now to the tribes." Joshua cast lots. Each tribe received its portion: Judah in the south, Ephraim and Manasseh in the central highlands, Naphtali in the north. The Levites were given no inheritance of land, only cities, for their inheritance was the Lord himself. Some tribes finished their task. Others hesitated. Some allowed enemies to remain. But the division stood. Caleb, the spy who stood with Joshua decades earlier, now 85 years old, came forward. "Give me the hill country," he said, "where the Anakim dwell, where the cities are large and fortified. If the Lord is with me, I will drive them out." And he did. Hebron became his inheritance. Joshua himself received a town in the hill country of Ephraim. There he settled, not in grandeur but in quiet faithfulness. And the Lord gave rest to the land. Cities of refuge were established, places where those who killed unintentionally could flee, protected from vengeance until judged. Justice with mercy. A nation guided not just by power but by law. 48 cities were set aside for the Levites, scattered among the tribes. Reminders that worship and instruction were central to life in the land. Not one promise failed. The Lord had sworn to give this land to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He had promised it through Moses, and now, under Joshua, it had been delivered. But the conquest was only the beginning. Holding the land would require more than swords. It would require faithfulness. Joshua gathered the tribes at Shiloh. The tabernacle was set up, the dwelling place of God among his people. The people rejoiced, but they also hesitated. Some tribes delayed in claiming their inheritance. Joshua rebuked them. How long will you wait to take possession of the land the Lord has given you? Maps were drawn, boundaries set, but every line came with a calling. Live here in covenant. Be faithful. Be holy. The victories were not theirs alone, they were the Lord's. And now, with swords sheathed and tribes settled, Joshua knew his final task was near. Joshua was old. The battles were behind him, but the burden of leadership remained. He gathered all the tribes of Israel at Shechem, a place of history and covenant. Abraham had first built an altar there. Jacob had buried idols beneath its trees. And now, once more, the people stood before God to remember who they were and why they were here. Joshua spoke not of strategies or politics, but of story. He recounted the journey, how God had called Abraham from beyond the Euphrates, how Isaac was born, how Jacob went down to Egypt, and how God brought them out with signs and wonders. He reminded them of the wilderness, of the Red Sea, of the manna, of the voice at Sinai, of victories they did not earn, of vineyards they did not plant, and cities they did not build. I gave you a land you did not labor for, the Lord had said, and towns you did not build, and yet you live in them. Then Joshua turned to them, and his voice sharpened. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And then came the most famous words of his life, perhaps of the entire book. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The people responded with passion. Far be it from us to forsake the Lord. We will serve him. But Joshua pushed back. You are not able to serve the Lord, he warned. He is holy. He is jealous. If you turn away, he will bring disaster. Still, they insisted, we will serve the Lord. Then you are witnesses against yourselves, he said. Now throw away the foreign gods among you. And they did. A large stone was set up under the oak tree near the tabernacle, a witness to their promise. Then, quietly, Joshua dismissed the people to their inheritance. Soon after, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died. He was 110 years old. He was buried in the land of his inheritance, in the hill country of Ephraim. The bones of Joseph, carried from Egypt through all those years in the wilderness, were finally laid to rest at Shechem, fulfilling the request he made before his death. And Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, also died. An era ended. But the story was not over. As long as that generation lived, those who had known Joshua, who had seen the works of the Lord, Israel remained faithful. But change was coming. The conquest had given them land. The covenant had given them identity. But the question would remain. Would they remember? Or would they forget? Would they trust the God who had parted seas, shattered walls, and stopped the sun? Or would they chase the gods of the nations they had displaced? The book of Joshua ends not with finality, but with a tension, a hope that what began in courage and obedience would continue. But history would tell another story. And the next book would begin with these quiet, foreboding words, after the death of Joshua. The death of Joshua was more than the passing of a man. It marked the end of a generation, the last to remember slavery, to witness the wilderness, to taste manna, to stand in awe as walls fell and waters parted. With Joshua gone, the mantle of leadership passed to no single man. There was no new Moses, no successor ordained by fire or voice. Instead, the people were to be governed by God alone through the law and the covenant. But faith, unguarded, fades. In the early chapters of Judges, we are told that after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. And so began the slow unraveling of a people who had once seen miracles. They lived in the land, but they forgot the giver. They reaped the harvest, but they neglected the covenant. They tolerated the idols of their neighbors, first at the edges, then in their own homes. The gods of the Amorites, the Baals and Ashtoreths seeped into their lives, not through conquest, but through compromise. And the pattern began: disobedience, oppression, crying out, deliverance, and then forgetfulness again. The book of Judges would unfold this cycle again and again, a downward spiral where the people drifted further from the God who had saved them. But even in their failure, God did not abandon them. He raised up judges, not courtroom figures, but deliverers, men and women of courage, flawed yet chosen, who stood in the breach when the people cried out. Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, Samson, each emerged in their time, led by the Spirit, used for a purpose, then faded. There was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And yet, the covenant endured. The story begun in Joshua would not be undone by rebellion. The God who brought them into the land would not abandon his promise, but he would not force their loyalty. He had given them a land, a law, a history, a name. What he would not give them was faith. That they would have to choose. And as the dust of Joshua's era settled over the hills of Canaan, the people stood at a new kind of threshold, not one of rivers and armies, but of memory. Would they remember? Would they walk in the way of promise? Or would they forget and become lost in the very land they were given to possess?